Howdy, this is Dr. Robin with Big College Sports, BCS.net, part of the VZQ network. Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you get a lot of useful information about college sports. Today we're talking about recruiting for the University of Oklahoma football team for the 2022 season. All right, this is Dr. Robin. We're here with Dr. Ed Story. We're going to talk a little bit of OU football. Today we're going to talk about some recruiting stuff. And Ed, I want you to fill the fans in on how you came to be such a recruiting buff.
Okay. I think it's really important. A lot of people don't really understand the gravity of recruiting, how critically important it is to a program's success. Without players, you can have the greatest coaches in the world, but if you don't have the right players, and not just the 5-star players, but it does help. I always tell people, people say, well, yeah, but Wes Welker was a 3-star player, or Baker Mayfield was a 3-star player. But those guys are exceptions to the rule. They were 3-star players with 5-star hearts and work ethic and that sort of thing. Matter of fact, let me tell you, let me give you a Wes Welker story. I love this story, which will kind of
because you actually taught at the same school where Wes
exactly,
Welker went to school.
Exactly.
Not everyone knows that.
And knew his brother well. His brother was right down the hall from me, so we had a lot of conversations about Wes. But Wes Welker is one of those stories that people who maybe don't appreciate a 5-star athlete will appreciate a 3-star story. But Wes, here's a good story. Wes actually came out of Heritage Hall, wasn't well known, but people who knew football knew the kid could play. He had quick wheels. He could run. He could catch the ball, and he was a gamer. He's kind of like Baker in a lot of ways. He was just a gamer. But coming out of high school, nobody recruited him. The only team that really went after Wes Welker was Tulsa under Todd Graham. Todd Graham's coach over at the time, and he was kind of goofy. I'll tell you a little bit about Todd Graham. I knew him as well. He was a high school coach in Oklahoma and Arkansas. But anyway, he missed the boat on this deal. But he recruited Wes Welker, offered him a scholarship. So Wes and the family goes over to Tulsa to sign the papers and kind of get started. And they go over there and they realize Todd Graham says, "Oh, I'm sorry. We thought we had an extra scholarship for you, but we don't. We don't have a scholarship for you. So we're not going to be able, you could walk on."
That was a bad call.
A horrible call. But that call became somebody else's golden opportunity. Wes Welker, but also Mike Leach over at Texas Tech said, he'd heard the story how Wes Welker was going to have to walk on somewhere, play at UCO, which nothing wrong with UCO, but it's not Big 12 football. It's not D1 football. And so he heard the rumors. So he said, well, come on over and you can at least walk on over here if you want to. Because he wasn't going to walk on at Tulsa at that point. So they go over to Lubbock and they walk out there and they start crying out for the team and everything. And Leach says, this guy can play. And he said, okay, yeah, we're going to give you a full ride scholarship. So as I said, the rest is history. So he just did wonderfully well at the college level. Ended up playing for New England Patriots. And every time I'd watch him play, I remember I was in Dallas one year and he was playing against the Cowboys down there. And I was like, wow, this guy is just a phenomenal athlete. But again, he just had a heart. He had a big heart. So that's a perfect example of a 3-star kid. But you cannot, you need those 3-star athletes. You need kids who want to be coached up. And that's what Wes Welker, he was that kind of kid. He was like a Baker, was that kind of kid. Okay, let me tell you the Baker Mayfield story too. What I'm at it. It's also a good story. Baker Mayfield was a 3-star coming out of high school too, out of Austin Westlake, and nobody really recruited Baker either. Texas Tech offered him late in the process, so he goes over to. I guess he actually ended up walking on at Texas Tech. Now, why he ended up over there, nobody really knows, but he did. He goes over there, and I remember his first game at Texas Tech. This kid was playing SMU, and this kid was just unbelievable. Just how well he played that first game. I'm thinking this kid is 6 weeks out of high school. 6 weeks out of high school, and he is just acting. He just performing at an astronomical level. His first game of his college career. How's that possible? How did everybody miss out on this kid? Walked on at Texas Tech. Well, but people don't understand. Well, here's the other part of that story too. Is I can't remember the coach's name at Texas Tech. You may have to help me with that. He's now at Arizona Cardinals out there. But Mayfield started the season, did really well, but got hurt middle way through the season. So he went with the backup quarterback, and then at the end of the year, coach says, "Okay, well, we're going to have tryouts again." Baker goes, "Time out. I quarterbacked the entire season, and we had a phenomenal year. Why not? Why are you going to give me a chance?" What happened, little known, was that coming in that next year was Patrick Mahomes, to be the quarterback at Texas Tech. So Baker said, "Okay." They said, "Oh, well, Baker, you can be the backup." Well, Baker's not a backup quarterback. He's just not that kind of kid. So anyway, he said, "Oh, enough of that." So he transferred over to OU, and his next game to start as a quarterback was on the intramural team at OU. He said, "I'm just going to play intramural football this." And I've heard other players talk about playing against Baker Mayfield in the intramural season that year. He said, "Who is it?"
I haven't heard this story.
Yeah, true story. Who is this guy? He's just an unbelievable athlete. And anyway, so long story short, he went through, played that season, and then said, "I'm going to walk in at OU. I can play." He really wanted to play at OU. He's an OU guy, Sooner fan growing up, and he really wanted to play at OU. So sure enough, he walked in and told Bob Stoops one day in the locker room, what the office is, "Coach, I'm gonna play quarterback for you. That's what I want to do. I'm gonna play quarterback for OU. That's why I'm here." I said, "Who are you?" He had no clue, had no idea who he was. So anyway, it's okay. Well, you can walk on. Whatever, you can play here. So sure enough, the rest of the story is Baker Mayfield ended up proving the whole world wrong, that he was just a backup or a walk-on quarterback. And those are good.
Did he
stories.
win the intramural championship? That's what I want to know.
Yes, of course. That's right. He won that, and then we know. You know, one thing about Baker that I love about Baker Mayfield, I'll never forget that game against Ohio State. Of course, he took a lot of heat for this, but when he spiked the flag on the midfield after the game against Ohio State. But what people don't realize, OU needed that at that point in time. They needed someone to step up, take charge, and say, "I love this school."
The Sooner fans did not give him a hard time about it. The
no.
Sooner fans loved it.
Well, it's funny. I went to work on that Monday, and there's an OU guy over at UConn. I'm going, and he said, the guy says, "I wish you hadn't done that." I'm going, "Seriously? You can't really be an OU fan and not have loved what he did Saturday night, because that would just, and it set the tone, not just for that season, but it set the tone for years to come. I think that one moment may be as big a moment as there is in OU history, where he set the tone. This is what we're about, and we can come into Columbus, Ohio. We can go into Tennessee. We can go into those kind of places and win football games, which that's hard. Not only is it hard to do, most people won't even schedule those games. They won't even bother. They won't not going to do that. But people like when you got Baker Mayfield as a quarterback, or those kinds of players, that's you schedule those games because once you get past the initial shock of the crowd, then you take charge. You take charge.
The Ohio State fans remember that for
Oh yeah,
sure.
extremely
Because
well.
I was watching a pro game when
Yeah.
Baker was playing San Francisco,
Uh-huh.
and Nick Bosa, that of course
Yeah.
San Francisco won, and
Right.
so Nick Bosa went and planted the flag in the middle of the field when he was done, just to spite Baker.
It probably bothered Baker very little because he was past that point. He's bigger than life at that point, you know. But no, it bothered them a lot. But they've had their time. But you know, it's interesting. We beat Ohio State that night, but we also beat Ohio State back about 20 years earlier than that with a kid out of Hooks, Texas, named Billy Sims.
Heard of him?
Yeah, and same kind of thing. We went to Ohio State thinking we could win, thinking we were OU, and we're going to create some Sooner magic, and we did. But back to recruiting, we could have won that game without Billy Sims. You know, you can win games occasionally with a three-star kid, but you really need big linemen that are 4 or 5-star athletes that can push people around. You got to have the Selman brothers to jump in on defense and just manhandle. You have to have a Brian Bosworth that I'll never forget. People are critical of Brian Bosworth for a lot of reasons, and understandably so. He was different. He was different. But I tell you what about Brian Bosworth. My friend Dr. Tamich always will say, whenever we went to Dallas with Brian Bosworth on the bus, we're going to come back happy every year. He just had a way. Of course, he hated Texas. That's the first thing. Though he was from Texas, hated Texas, but he just had a way of manhandling Texas. It's like a man among boys when Bosworth was on the field. So it was just, you know, recruiting is important. You got to get those kind of kids. So that's I grew up understanding. Let's talk a little about recruiting and where my how I grew to love recruiting growing up. Two people in my mind helped me create a love for recruiting because I didn't understand anything about it. One was Joe Terranova. Joe Terranova.
Never heard of Joe Terranova.
Exactly. Nobody has except Ed Story. And I don't know how I came to know about Joe Terranova, but some way or another, I found out about his magazine. What a magazine! It wasn't a pamphlet. It was a kind of a booklet, if you will. And every year, Joe Terranova would create a booklet of the top 25 classes in the recruiting season that year. And I would wait for that. And this is, of course, in those days, the signing date was the second Wednesday in February. And so I'd wait about the 1st of March. I'd get this from Joe Terranova, the information. I would glean that. I would just pour over that and just read it over and over and over. So, and it had in there, and invariably, we would find that the teams that were in the top 10, top 15, top 20, they were the teams that were 2 years from that point were going to be the top 10, the top 15 every year. So he knew his stuff. Matter of fact, years later, I stopped getting the pamphlet or the booklet, whatever you want to call it. And so I called up there and said, it's Dearborn, Michigan, and talked to his wife. I said, you know, I'm Ed Story. I'm down here in Moore, Oklahoma, and I've always gotten Joe's recruiting information. And he passed away. But she said to me, you know, I so much appreciate you calling because he loved that. He loved putting that together. And if he knew you'd called asking about it, he would really appreciate that. But that was Joe Terrell. I got that first, and then here's the other thing a lot of people don't understand too. For Oklahoma recruiting, the very first person in Oklahoma that really started covering recruiting was Al Eschbach.
Really?
Yes, Al
That was
Eschbach.
before he was on
Yeah.
the Sports Animal
Yeah.
and such?
Exactly. He'd just gotten out of college, and he was the sports editor at the Oklahoma Journal over in Midwest City. And a lot of people don't know about the Oklahoma Journal. What had happened, a guy named Atkinson, Bill Atkinson, out of Midwest City, he decided he was tired of Gaylord running things, the only game in town with newspaper. So he decided he's going to start his own newspaper. He's going to call it the Oklahoma Journal, and he was going to see if he could compete with Gaylord for the media presence in the Oklahoma City, the print media side of it in Oklahoma City. So we hired Al Eschbach to be a sports editor. And the thing about Al is that he knew recruiting. Now, later on, people kind of got off into other things, but other sports areas. But the one thing Al knew was recruiting. And I remember well how, same thing, in the spring of the year, after recruiting date in February, I'd get that journal and I would pore over it, and I became a much more knowledgeable fan because of Al Eschbach. And he was just a kid right out of college.
Is Al about your age? Is he your contemporary?
A little bit older, I think, but about the same age, basically. But those two people got me started on recruiting, and then after that, it just I couldn't get enough of it. Okay.
You want to talk more about what got you into recruiting?
One other thing I'd like to say too is I want to thank my mom. I want to thank my mom.
You can never thank your mom too much.
That's right. That's exactly right. She didn't have a clue about football and couldn't care less about football. Now she did care about baseball because that's what I played. But as far as football, she really didn't care much about that. But she loved me, and she knew how much I love recruiting. So when I was in the Army back in Maryland, she would send me in February, March every year clippings from the paper with all the recruiting information. And because she knew how badly I wanted that information, how I loved it. And sure enough, she was right. I would get that in the mail, and I would, again, pour over that information, study it. And I would have had that because that's when OU was on probation. For about 2 years, OU was on probation, and they were on TV. So to get that in the mail was like godsend for me. I needed that in the worst way.
Yeah.
Being away from home and starved for OU football, any kind of OU football, and for her to send me recruiting clippings in the mail, that tells you how much she loved me and how important that was to me. So the other thing, of course, over the years I've just followed recruiting, and I hopefully have become more knowledgeable. One of the things I have found over the years, there are two sources of information that I access for the most part for recruiting information. One is Rivals, rivals100.com. And they really the first ones who really began to analyze recruiting by team and do it yearly, it was a continuous flow of information about recruiting. The other source of information is 24/7 Sports, which is the OU Insider channel, if you will. And what I try to do is compare those two sources of information, because I can pretty much figure out what's going on by using those rankings, if you will. And I look at the rankings every other day just to see how we're doing. I think going back to Al Ishbak and realizing recruiting and picking up on names, I tell you what, during the Bud era, we were really, really obviously very good, very good. But toward the end of the Bud era, we kind of sort of began to tail off a little bit. And part of that, a great deal of that actually, had to do with the fact that we're being out recruited, uh, um, especially in Texas. I mean, Texas was killing us in football. It's because Texas had the entire state to recruit from, and Texas high school football is second to none. It's a religion down there, and so with those Texas high school kids, we didn't have much of a chance against Texas every year. Well, I think eventually we kind of figured that out. Oh, you did. Uh, and the first kid out of Texas that we recruited that I remember well was a kid by the name of Jack Mildren.
I've heard of him. Lieutenant Governor.
Yes. And Jack Mildren, nobody expected him to come to OU to play. Nobody. He was the number one player in the country out of Abilene Cooper. Matter of fact, one good thing about recruiting too is that I could teach Texas geography really well because I know where every high school in Texas is located. Every town, every high school, I know them by their, like Lubbock Coronado or Abilene Cooper or Odessa Permian, because you learn because that's where those high school players are from. Whether they came to OU or not, I began to realize, okay, this is that town. This is where that kid played football. But anyway, back to Jack Mildren. Jack Mildren was an incredible high school quarterback. Everybody wanted him. And at the last minute, he decided, I want to go to OU. So here's this kid out of the West Texas, who everybody was dying to sign with them, came to OU. And as I say again, it made all the difference in the world. The rest was history. Now, it's really interesting because Jack Mildren, in those days, they didn't have freshman eligibility. So when he first got to OU, he had to sit out for 1 year, his freshman year. And it wasn't until he was a sophomore. In his sophomore year, the team was struggling. Matter of fact, I'm trying to think how we did. I think Texas beat us like a drum that year. But that was the next year, I believe, is when we actually implemented the wishbone offense during the off week. Texas had had the flexbone or the that they call it down there in Texas, and we thought, how are we ever going to compete against those guys if we don't do something like that? Well, Barry Switzer was the offensive coordinator. He said, I got a quarterback can do this. Actually, Steve Davis and then Mildren. And they spent the off week between that game against, I think it's Oregon State and Texas, to create that wishbone offense for OU. Now, we lost the game. I think it was 41-9. But the first half, we played with them. And they realized, okay, this could work. So now we just got to find the athletes. We got to recruit the Greg Pruitts and the Joe Wileys and the Jack Mildrens to run this offense. Well, we did, and it happened. When Jack Mildren was a senior, we beat Texas 47-28. And that was a big deal. That was a really, really big deal. And then we just took off from there because we realized we got to recruit Texas high school athletes, and Barry Switzer was the master. The guy could, sell snow to an Eskimo. He was like, and of course Barry, he didn't mind bending the rules as well. Matter of fact, story about Billy Sims out of Hooks, Texas, out of East Texas, Hooks, Texas. Story is that everybody was in Texas. East Texas tried to sign Billy Sims on signing date. They couldn't find him. But what had happened? Barry Switzer had hit him out. He'd kidnapped him, taken him. He kidnapped him.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, Barry Switzer kidnapped Billy Sims, took him across town, and nobody saw him for a week. And then on signing date, here he shows up, signs with OU. And of course, Billy Sims.
So strictly speaking, that was not legal.
Well,
by the NCAA
probably
rules.
not. Probably not. But and let's face it, we eventually did not for that particular incident, but we did spend some time in the jail cell with the NCAA because he spent a couple years on probation. But I will say this: I think that was sad. It was difficult, but we still won a national championship during that time, even when we were on probation. So yeah, there was a downside to that, but we kept getting players, kept building our name.
The violations happened when Chuck Fairbanks was the coach, right? And then,
Basically, yeah.
Then he left.
Yeah, he left. Well, and I think Bear was in the middle. Of course, he was Chuck Fairbanks' assistant coach, so he was in the middle of that. One of the things I remember very well was the kid out of Port Arthur, Texas. Actually, Galveston, maybe Texas. Gosh, he was an incredible football player, and there was some transcript issues where got us in trouble there, and that was legitimate. You know, we should have gotten slapped for that. You know, that's something you just don't do. Try to remember the kid's name.
Barry just got a pencil out and erased a few things on the transcript.
I think he convinced a counselor, maybe. I think he convinced the school counselor, that I think this kid, didn't he make a C on that test instead of of an F or a D? Yeah, as a matter of fact, he did. But yeah, bottom line is, I will say that was a sad day, because I remember thinking, well, we're never going to recover from that, but we did, and I think what happened, we got better at it, you know, and eventually get to the point where you don't have to worry. I mean, they're coming to us, and so
right.
It just turned things around completely. So yeah, but recruiting is critically important.
So what are your thoughts on the way recruiting has gone lately?
At OU.
Say when Lincoln Riley was here versus now with Brent Venables.
You know, I think that's a really good question. I remember thinking whenever Lincoln was here, and we had he recruited a 5-star kid out of Spencer Rattler out of Arizona, and then he was on campus, ready to go, red shirt, ready to go, and then he recruited Caleb Williams out of D.C. So here we are. We've got 2 5-star quarterbacks on campus. I thought, this is perfect. You got Spencer Rattler, he's a redshirt sophomore. He's going to win the Heisman this year and go on. And then Caleb Williams is on campus. He's the backup. He'll be ready to go next year. So we're gonna start a 5-star quarterback 2 years in a row. You know, and we also had a kid named Malachi Nelson out of LA that had committed to OU. He was a 5-star quarterback. So we're going to have 3 5-star quarterbacks in a span of 4 years at OU, 5 years at OU, one after the other. Well, here's the problem with that.
That went all to crap, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Exactly. It certainly did. Because I think with 5-star quarterbacks, and sometimes 5-star players, but especially 5-star quarterbacks, especially in the age of NIL, you get 5-star egos. And that's what we had. We had some 5-star egos. You know, it would have been too good. It would just been too convenient for Spencer just to finish out the year. You know, of course, he struggled early on, which gave Caleb Williams and his fans a chance to campaign for him. But it also gave Lincoln Riley a chance to say, you know, Spencer, I know I told you you're going to be the quarterback here, but I'm going to go with Caleb now. In that Texas game, while it worked out beautifully for us on the scoreboard, and is one of the greatest comebacks in the history of OU football, it worked out. It didn't work out really well for us in the long run, because you remember after the Texas win, then we had the Kansas game where we just barely limped out of Lawrence with the win, and we really didn't play well the rest of the year. So I think in hindsight, we would have been better off to go with our 5-star guy, Spencer Rattler. And Spencer Rattler, he's, in my opinion, he's going to do really well at South Carolina this year, really well.
Well, the bottom line is the head coach was backing out the door, hoping nobody noticed.
Exactly. I think that the whole thing was a sham. The whole thing was a sham. So Lincoln's on the way out of town, and Caleb was, you know, he was sort of, okay, you know, where am I going to be next? It worked out poorly for us, and I think that if we'd had a Baker Mayfield on campus, anyway, it just didn't work out. It just didn't work out for us. I'm trying to remember. There's another comparison the other day. I thought about this very thing somewhere else. He'll kind of be here in a second. But there's a situation similar to that, and those things just don't work out for you. You can't have too many. If you have 2 5-star quarterbacks on the team, you probably don't have a quarterback on the team, because they're going to divide the locker room, and I think that's what happened with that. Spencer had his guys, and Caleb had his guys, and it went downhill from there.
Well, yeah, they had the 2 5-star kids that both thought they needed to be starting, but they had no leadership telling them any different. Anyway, so I'm thinking it's going to be different with Brent Venables, don't you?
Yeah, I really do. I think I really like the kid. Of course, Dylan Gabriel, I like him a lot. But here's the other kid, the Quinn.
He looked good at the spring game.
Yeah, and he's going to be. He's a really good quarterback. And I also like the Jackson Arnold kid coming in. He's committed for the 23 class, and I think what's happening though, I think we're getting a different type quarterback. One thing, anytime you get a kid out of Denton, Texas, you're getting a player. Denton, and that's
how do you put that together?
History. I mean, for some reason, Denton, Texas, has become the epicenter of high school football in Texas. It used to be Odessa, then it was Katy, Texas, and the Houston area. Now it's Denton. You got Denton Guyer, Denton High School, and there's 3 high schools there that it's become a phenomenal place for high school football. So point being, Billy Bowman. Billy Bowman is he's from Denton as well, and those kids play a different brand of football. They're talented, but they're well coached, and they're disciplined. I mean, Billy Bowman is just like he's a phenom when it comes to how well coached he is, and how he wants to be coached up. He's from Denton. So you got Billy Bowman, and then you got Jackson Arnold this year. But we got a pipeline. If we can develop a pipeline from Norman to Denton, then we're going to be pretty darn good.
You don't think the Mean Green's going to start picking off the 5 stars from down there?
If they do, we're in trouble. Yeah. We do. But let's go back to Brent's philosophy. I think what I like about Brent, and I'm sold on this. I'm sold on this, and I did a blog here a while back, and I talked about how at that point I think we were ranked 42nd in rivals in recruiting, and that's about we're about 38 right now in recruiting. Now there was a time that would drive me right over the edge. I'd go crazy with that lower ranking in the summer prior to the signing date, which is the signing date these days is in December, so it's a lot earlier than it used to be. So we're 4 months away from the signing date, and to rank 38th, 42nd in the country in recruiting, that would be something to really be concerned about. But I think what's going to happen is Brent Venables is saying to his recruits, okay, don't commit to OU until you're sure this is where you want to be. He compares it to a marriage, that if when you get married, you stop looking around. You stop looking around. You stop dating, and you commit to that marriage. Okay, I want you to commit to OU, and it's not just on signing date, but on commitment date. If you tell the world you come to OU, don't change your change your mind in early December. Say, well, I decided to go to Alabama, and that was the case with Lincoln. I don't know how many times we'd lose a kid to Alabama or Texas or A&M or whoever at the last minute, and it would crush your class. I'm convinced that with the Brent Venables philosophy, these kids are going to be permanent fixtures. Once they commit, I think they'll be there on signing date. So I think what people have to understand and get used to is that we're going to be more patient. You know, we're 30th now. We'll be 35th next week. The week after that, we'll be 30, 32, 30, and we're going to go right up to the list. I think we'll eventually probably have a top 10 class because these kids they're going to stop looking around. And I think
So where'd we finish this last year? I don't remember.
we finished number 10. Number 10. Number
That's
10.
really freaking good with a brand new coach.
Unbelievable, because that never happens. Never happens. If you have a turnover in the first signing date, the first signing date was I guess 2 weeks away. Whenever we hired Brent Venables, less than 2 weeks away, and so and we lost obviously some kids to USC, different places that had Malachi Nelson, he was committed to OU, so we lost some kids at the last minute. Decided, well, we're going to start looking around. We're going to start looking around because the coaching change. We got to make sure we're comfortable with the coaches here now. So we lost several of those guys. But for him to come in and have a top 10 class that may be the best, most remarkable recruiting feat ever. It's because it's hard to have a top 10 recruiting class. And to do that with that situation going on like it was at OU, I think it's amazing how well he did. So I think we'll do well again. I think we'll be I'm not going to get carried away, but I will think it'll be really fun. And I tell my readers, I said it's going to be fun to look and say, in December, it's going to be fun to see where we end up and to look back in the summer of 22 and see where we were. That's going to be a lot of fun.
I bet we do really well this year in recruiting too,
Yeah.
but it's going to depend a lot on how well we play, how many games we win, and so forth.
And that, you're exactly. I think you're right. That invariably, what will happen if a team does well on the field, it will translate to a better recruiting class, because that's the way kids are. Just the way kids are. Well, back to one other thing about Brent Venables' style. I appreciate him saying to prospect recruits, you know, go look around. Go look around. Take your visits, but don't, because I want you to be satisfied. I want you to want to be here at OU. So those kids, they've gone to Alabama, they've gone to Auburn, they've gone to A&M, they've gone to Texas. So when they commit to OU, it's a done deal, and I don't going to have to worry about it so much.
So what I think it's going to come down to is Brent Venables and OU have to jointly put the money where the mouth is, because man, Brent Venables has been running his mouth. he's been making it look pretty glorious for what's coming up.
Yeah.
And I hope he can back that up. I think he can, but that's got to happen before the next recruiting class matches this last one.
I think you're right. And I will say, I think I saw the other day somebody had OU with I think what do you call it, the over and upper, upper and over, whatever it is, the Vegas.
Over under?
Over and under, yeah. Had us at like 9.5 wins. 9.5 wins. I think we'll do better than that. I think we'll do 10. But a 10-2 season in a coach's first year, people have to understand that is really, really phenomenal.
Who's going to beat us? I look at it, I see everybody on that schedule.
Oh,
we should beat all of them.
I think we'll be favored to beat every team on the schedule. The question will be, I think there's three question marks. One, of course, at Nebraska, because it's at Nebraska. The other would be Texas, and only because Texas, that Cotton Bowl, when they cut it in half, it's a home court advantage for both teams. So whoever's hot that day will have the advantage. I don't think Texas is back. I do think they'll be back eventually, but I don't think they'll be back this year. The third team that
you don't think Arch Manning's going to save them? Well, that's next year, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
the
next year. Okay.
And I think the other kid, Quinn Ewers, is a parent. I think he's a pretty good quarterback too. I think they're a year away. I do think that once they get Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning in the quarterback room, and once they get getting a lot of, they may have a top 3 class recruiting this year for 23. So I think even Sarkisian, it's going to be hard for him to screw that up. And he's hired some really good coaches. So I think in the future, Texas is something to worry about. I think right now mentally we own Texas. We own Texas. So even though I'll throw it out there that we have to worry about Texas, my heart of hearts, I'm thinking we own Texas. It's like when we come out of the tunnel, our kids just love that. They just love it, and they love playing Texas. And I think they own Texas. So in Nebraska,
we've gotten really used to beating Texas.
Yes,
It'd be sad if we had to get unused to that again.
Because
we, in our lifetimes, we've been pretty used to beating Texas. They beat us every now and then, but
yeah.
And then there was that stretch of like 5 years that they beat us every year, but otherwise we've
owned them since the war. Now, I told you this before. When I was growing up, we never beat Texas. We never beat Texas when I was growing up. But it got to a certain point in '68, along in there, the worm turned, and all of a sudden, okay, we got these guys, and ever since we've owned them. Back to recruiting. That's critical. If you own Texas, you're going to own Texas recruiting.
Right.
That's important.
That's huge, and that's what's
it is.
That's what Scott Frost says has really killed them is they can't recruit in Texas anymore because they're not in the Big 12.
Well, and
they don't have an exposure to the Texas
that's right. And
players.
That's a really good point, which you can talk about later in terms of conference expansion. But no, when you play in Texas like OU does, they beat Texas. We have a huge advantage. The other thing, I think we may be the home team this year. We're we're in white last year. Is that you remember? We were in white last year. Like, you know.
I never pay any attention to that because
Okay.
it seems like there's not a home team to me.
Well, I think it's critical in this regard. The home team gets to they get to recruit that day. So, for example, OU every Saturday you'll have a bunch of recruits there for the game. OU Texas, the only team that gets to have recruits there for the game is the home team.
Yep, didn't
Yep.
know that.
Yep.
I assumed they both could have
No,
recruits there.
no, only the home team. So there may be 150 high school players or players from all over the country, and they'll come out. They're going there. Go, what in the world? Those kids from back east or out west, California, they'll come to the OU Texas game and go, "Oh my God, I never experienced anything like this." And
You know, those kids though, when they're there, they're being recruited by both teams, whether they are or
that's
not.
right. Well, that's right.
They're going to see both teams, and whoever wins is going to have the advantage,
That's right.
even if it's not the home team.
Yeah, but I think we'll recruit kids. You're right; they're being recruited by both teams. But a lot of the kids we've honed in on are really down to us and somebody else. And so, but no, if we can have a good game that day in the Cotton Bowl, it makes a huge difference. So back to Brent real quick. I think that I like his philosophy. It's going to create. We're going to be more patient as fans, OU fans, in terms of the rankings. But in the end, I think we're going to be really happy with the results. One other thing about Brent Venables is he is creating a mindset among his players that it's not just about, it's more, we want to create a place where you can grow as a person. And I think parents like that. And when you're recruited, it's like, okay, here's an example. When we recruited the Selman brothers, 3 Selman brothers, the OU, we actually were recruiting their mom, because their mom was going to make that final decision of where they're going to go to school. And same with today. Brent Venables is saying to their mothers, to their fathers, okay, you come to OU, it's not just about football, it's about life. When your kid gets out of here in 4 years or 3 years, whatever it is, they're going to be a better person, they're going to be a better man, and they're going to get an education. And to a parent, even in the NIL world that we live in today, that still means a lot. It means a lot to a parent, and ultimately it's going to come down to that, making that decision, I think. So I think in the long run, Texas, I used as an example last week. Texas Tech, about 2 weeks ago, was ranked second in Rivals with their recruiting class. Texas Tech.
That has to be a joke, right?
No, because what had happened, they had 20 kids signed up, or they had 20 kids committed to go play for Texas Tech. OU at the time had like five players, and they had a lot of good players. But what's going to happen eventually? Those kids are going to say, "Oh, I like Tech, but do I want to spend 4 years in Lubbock?" You know,
I've been to Lubbock many times. We got family out there.
Yeah,
and I don't want to play football for Lubbock.
Exactly.
Texas Tech. Texas Tech's supposed to be a great university, especially if you want to be an engineer. But,
is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but they'll end up saying, "Okay, I think I'll go over here, and I think I'll flip." And so I want to do a comparison at the end. Okay, where did this is where Texas Tech started, number 2 in the country, back in June. Where are they today? This is where OU started back in June. Where are they today? And I think will tell you a lot about the process. Yeah. So,
Lubbock, I would compare it to do an Oklahoma comparison. I would compare it to Bartlesville or Lawton.
Hmm.
That's
It's funny you say
probably the best comparison I can give you. It's not Norman by any means.
no. And when you said Bartlesville, I said I wouldn't. I would say when you said I thought Lawton. I think
Yeah.
I think it's a lot like Lawton. Bless their hearts. I actually lived in Loveland, Texas, for a little bit, and of course I was in Woodruff for a while, and so I kind of know western Oklahoma, West Texas a little bit too. It's not something or Amarillo. Gosh, can you imagine spending your whole life in Amarillo?
I've got my wife's aunt has done it, and I guess she's survived. But
yeah.
there's just not a whole lot there. It's kind of.
Mm.
I mean, you might as well be living in. I grew up in Carnegie. My wife grew up in Mangan. Might as well be living there.
Yeah, but you're right. Norman has become. The kids really seem to love Norman. They get him in for an official visit, and they'll always talk about, of course, talk about the OU campus and OU tradition and all those things. But invariably, they'll talk about Norman. They love Norman, and I can see that. I mean, I'd love to live in Norman myself. My wife didn't want to live there because we have family north side, but I'd love to live in Norman.
That's my wife and I are talking about when she retires to get
Oh,
a place down in Norman so we could go to all the softball games,
Oh,
football
yeah.
games, and everything. I would go to every softball game if we
Yeah,
were both retired.
I know.
Okay, thanks for watching Big College Sports, BCS.net, part of the VZQ network. We'll see you back next time.